let's preview the New York Mets for 2026 up next on Fantasy Baseball Today. Welcome to On the Beat, our mini team preview series here at Fantasy Baseball Today. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Max Goodman, who covers the Mets for NJ Advanced Media. Make sure to give him a follow on X at Max T. Goodman. And let's begin with the Mets offseason. It has been a roller coaster ride, out with the old, in with the new. They traded Brendan Nimmo to the Rangers for Marcus Semien. They lost Pete Alonso to the Orioles. Never even made an offer. I know a lot of fans were upset about that one. They traded Jeff McNeil to the Athletics. They brought in a bunch of talent. They signed Devin Williams, Jorge Polanco, Luke Weaver earlier in the offseason. And then recently, we just got this flurry of moves. They missed out on Kyle Tucker. They pivoted. They signed Bo Bichette. Then they traded Luis Angel Acuna over to the White Sox for Luis Robert. They traded Brandon Sproat and Jet Williams over to the Brewers for Freddie Peralta and Tobias Myers. So they get that ace on their staff that they most desperately needed. It's a lot. They completely overhauled this team. Do you believe right now that heading into 2026, they are a better team than they were heading into last season?
I think they are, Frank. And I think that really just at the most basic level, changes needed to be happening this winter. I think change needed to be the operative word for this team going into the offseason. And that's the sense that we've gotten from David Stearns, the president of baseball ops. And whenever he's talked this offseason, that he really wanted to distance this roster from what transpired in 2025, which was, dare I say, one of the most disappointing seasons in Mets franchise history, coming off of what happened in 2024 with the core that they had, bringing in Soto with that mega contract and the hype around this team. And they didn't make the playoffs. I mean, they had a chance there at the end, but even if they did, how far were they going to go? That this core with Alonso, Nimmo, McNeil, Diaz, it didn't pan out. And I think that, kudos to Stearns in the front office in a way for looking beyond sentimentality and making those tough decisions, as much as he knew there was going to be a lot of backlash from the fan base, that a lot of these fans have jerseys from these players and they've loved them for years and years. And they got to look at it from an X and O standpoint between the lines. It just wasn't working. So they went in, that you use the word overhaul. I would say a total makeover. However you want to put it, it is a brand new looking roster with more of a focus on run prevention. I think the lineup has more balance and depth to it. And the upside of this team is huge. I think they could go in and win this division with the way that the team looks right now. A lot of question marks, of course. We'll get into the specifics of this roster too, but I like the moves that they've made, Frank.
Yeah. So we are both local. You're in New York. I'm in New Jersey. I still listen to kind of New York radio just to get a feel for the vibe and what everyone's saying about the Yankees and the Mets and everything. And for most of the offseason, everybody was killing David Stearns. But, now they've got to walk it back a little bit because he has kind of built out a legitimate team here on paper. I know they've stressed run prevention. They have some guys playing out of place or in new positions that they haven't played before, but up the middle, I think especially they should be really, really good defensively. They got Semien, they got Lindor, they got Luis Robert there, and then we'll see how Polanco and Bichette can do on the corners in the infield, but I think they'll wind up being all right. Let's get into some big fantasy questions for the Mets right now, and taking a look at their rotation, you got Freddie Peralta and Nola McLean up at the top. I really wouldn't be surprised if maybe they made another move, but as of right now, the way that things are constituted, they have four other names here kind of rounding out the rotation. David Peterson, Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, and they have Tobias Myers waiting in the wings if they need him. How do you see this rotation rounding out? I mean, do they go with a 5-man and one of these guys is in the bullpen? Do you see them maybe using a 6-man rotation to start the season? I mean, obviously it's like anybody can get hurt between now and the start of the season, so they have that depth built in. But if all 6 of these guys are healthy, do you see a 6-man rotation or one of these guys going to the bullpen?
Well, you mentioned the injuries, and I think that was how I was going to preface my answer no matter what. And covering the Yankees for the last several years before this, we see every single spring that it's guaranteed that somebody's going to get hurt. I don't think that's a cynical, assessment from me. It kind of just happens around the league. So I think that it's better to have depth. I mean, you mentioned Tobias Myers coming in. I think he'll get some starts. Let's not forget Jonah Tong and also Christian Scott, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery. So they have a lot of options. And you alluded to it too. I think they might go out and add one more starter just to have another proven commodity, maybe an innings eater, a more cost-effective type of acquisition, just to have another reliable source of starts in there somewhere. If everybody's healthy, it's hard to envision all 6 of those guys not being involved in some capacity. I don't think that Stearns has been asked this winter about the possibility of a 6-man rotation. So that's definitely like an early spring training type of question. In a hypothetical where everybody's good to go, how do you envision Senga and Peterson factoring in? Because I think that Holmes and Minaya will definitely be in there. Obviously, McLean and Peralta too. The sense that we've gotten from Senga in terms of what the Mets have said this offseason is that he's really distancing himself from 2 injury-riddled seasons where it feels like an eternity ago when he was almost a Cy Young Award winner in his rookie season coming over from Japan and having a huge season for the Mets. So I think that he'll get some starts, but we'll see if he can stay healthy. I mean, Peterson was an all-star last year too, but he finished the year on more of a down note. So I think everybody's going to factor in maybe someone gets put in the bullpen, but I don't necessarily know who that would be. Holmes has experience as a reliever, but I think he's valuable for them as a starter.
Yeah, so definitely something we'll have to pay attention to early on in spring training. Clay Holmes, that's kind of the one that I've been leaning on. Like maybe he just goes to the bullpen, but he performed well last year. So definitely something to pay attention there with the Mets rotation. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this.
This isn't just combat. It's cinema.
Ready or not, here I come. Let's go!
Are you not entertained?
The new home of UFC, Paramount Plus.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball. Today we are previewing the New York Mets here with Max Goodman. And I've got one more big fantasy question here before we get to your sleeper and your breakout. Carson Benge is a prospect that we've heard a lot about this offseason. It seems like the Mets really like him. It feels like it's his job to lose in spring training and put up great numbers in the minors last year. I know my co-host Scott White has kind of high-end comped him to someone like Christian Yelich based on what we've seen so far in the minors. Do you believe Carson Benge will be up on opening day?
Okay, so I grappled with this quite a bit the other day when I did a roster preview coming out of, you mentioned that really busy week where Bichette, Robert Jr., and now Peralta were all added, because we can envision what their 26-man roster on opening day would be now more than any other point in the offseason. And I settled on him starting the year in AAA, and that's by no means a knock on Benge at all. And I agree with you. I think that he's going to come in with a legitimate chance to make this roster. But when I look at this outfield after the acquisition of Robert, there's a lot less pressure on Benge to actually make the club. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he's got only, 20 or 30 something games of AAA in his tool belt at this point. Like he could still benefit from some seasoning down there, which would be Syracuse for the Mets, to start the year and just make sure he's good to go against big league pitching. The caveat there, of course, is that if we show up to spring training and he's taken a lot of steps forward offensively in his offseason, and then he's raking against grapefruit league pitching, then yeah, I think he makes the club. But as of right now, with the fact that Robert's going to be in center, you have Tyrone Taylor as maybe a stopgap, someone that they trust defensively that could play a little left. And also, mind you, the Mets aren't necessarily done with acquisitions. I know Harrison Bader just came off the board, but there are some other veterans that they could sign to play a corner outfield and then transition into more of a bench role once Benge is ready. So I think as of now, I'm leaning more towards him starting in AAA, but he's going to be a factor. He's going to play a lot for this club in 2026 and beyond. It's just a matter of when.
Mm-hmm. So to your point, only 24 games at AAA for Carson Benge last year, and he struggled at AAA. He hit only 178, a 583 OPS. The plate discipline was still fine there. But yeah, I mean, obviously just did not put up big numbers at AAA. So I definitely could see that as a possibility, and definitely a name to watch during spring training, because if he is hitting well, he could turn out to be a sleeper for fantasy purposes. Speaking of a sleeper, who do you have here for the Mets in 2026?
So at this point, I think that Jorge Polanco is counting as a sleeper. A couple weeks ago, he was one of the biggest moves that the Mets had made this offseason, but now he's definitely flown under the radar with the other big bats that they've brought in. When I look at their lineup from a fantasy perspective, and, Fangraphs, for instance, has made their projection of what the Mets lineup would be, and Polanco's in the cleanup spot. And when you have Lindor, Soto, Bichette in front, and the way that they can work the count, work great at bats, get on base, and put the ball in play, I think Polanco is going to be coming up a lot with runners on base. And then you look at how he performed last year. Obviously, he has a lot of experience and has been a great hitter throughout his career. But his runners and scoring position numbers this past year were tremendous. And if he can come up with guys on base, which obviously we know Soto is as good as it gets in terms of getting on, but Bichette is as good of a right-handed hitter in the league. That's why I think he's a great fit in this lineup to bring that balance in there. I think Polanco is going to have a big year. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. I don't know how the fit at first base is going to go, but there's also a scenario here where Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos start playing a lot more first base, and Polanco could maybe settle into more of a DH role with them. And I think we can keep the same logic with Robert coming over from the White Sox. Neither of those guys have to be the best hitter in this lineup. They're complementary pieces for the Mets. So if they can just provide some thump in the middle of the order, they're not going to necessarily be Pete Alonso, but the aggregate of all of these guys that were brought in, this could be a high octane offense. And I think that Polanco can be a big part of that.
Yeah, and you brought up the RBI opportunities for Jorge Polanco. Last year, Pete Alonso, 126 RBI, and there might not be a better spot in all of baseball than to hit cleanup for the New York Mets when you consider their top three, Lindor, Soto, Bo Bichette. I mean, that is maybe the best three outside of the Dodgers, I guess, in all of baseball. And you got Polanco hitting right behind those guys. So full agreement. I wrote up Polanco in Sleepers 1.0. He's going outside the top 200 picks in early drafts right now. So he is being slept on quite a bit. I would agree. What about a breakout for the Mets this upcoming season?
So we can go in a couple different directions here. Maybe a Nolan McLean, if you consider him not already a breakout from last year. There are so many young phenoms on this roster. We mentioned Beatty already and potentially even Benge. But I'm going to go with Francisco Alvarez because I feel like we've seen flashes of the potential there going back to when he was a top prospect in this organization, but he's never really put it together for a full healthy season. And mind you, I didn't cover the Mets these last several years, so a lot of this is from following from afar. But his numbers over the last, I think it was 41 games last year, he had a 921 OPS. It was like a 150 WRC plus type player. And again, if he's in the middle of the order, he's going to have a lot of RBI opportunities and can be more of a righty power presence for this club. It's almost like, man, if he can figure it out, this team looks even more like a deep postseason run type of lineup because the complementary pieces, again, in addition to Soto and Lindor and Bichette, it starts to get a little more dangerous and formidable with the depth of this order. So I don't know how he's going to do defensively. I know there are questions there, and obviously the health too, when you look at his body of experience over the last several years. But man, if he can figure it out for a full season offensively, that he could be one of the best hitters in the catcher spot from a fantasy perspective, I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, and catcher is in a great spot this year. There are so many young, enticing players from a fantasy perspective. I agree with you on Alvarez. You brought it up. The last 41 games, you hit it spot on, by the way. Second half, 921 OPS there. And some of the StatCast numbers, 93.4 average exit velocity, 16% barrel rate. So he was putting up massive numbers. I commend the Mets for he needed work. They sent him down to the minors, which was not an easy decision to make. And he came back and he hit much better. I was actually clamoring for the Yankees to do this with Anthony Volpe, but they just never did. But I think it worked quite well for Alvarez. So hopefully he can carry that second half over into 2026. Big thanks to Max Goodman, who covers the Mets for NJ Advanced Media. Make sure to check out his work and give him a follow on X at Max T. Goodman. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to our full-length podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to our On the Beat team preview series, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.